Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Keeping an Eye on the Geopolitical Ball with me, Jamie Shea, Senior Fellow at Friends of Europe. Cybercrime has now become big business. Experts calculate that it costs companies between 100 billion and 200 billion every year. The average cost of a ransomware attack is now $500,000. And over the last couple of weeks, we've seen just how dangerous this criminal activity can be. For example, people were queuing up in the United States outside gas stations after Colonial Pipelines shut down because of a ransomware attack. It paid $4 million in ransom. Then the JBS Brazilian meat packaging chain, also very active in the United States, was the victim of such an attack and paid $11 million in ransom. And just this past weekend, we've had the example of a Russian criminal syndicate called ReEvil hacking in to the Kaseya management software system, which many companies use to manage their daily transactions. This is a so-called supply chain attack, which means that the criminal gang get access to 200 companies in over 17 countries and therefore can hold each individually to a ransom. These can vary from $5 million to just $45,000, according to the inclination of the gang and the size and importance of the company. But this past weekend, we had the example of 800 supermarkets run by Co-op in Sweden closing because their cash registers were put out of action. Now, when we point the finger at Russia, for example, because 75% of all of these criminal ransomware attacks seem to come from Russia, the Kremlin shrugs its shoulders and says, "It wasn't me, come up with the evidence." And this is because international law at the moment has a doctrine called effective control, which has been endorsed by the International Court of Justice, which means that the state is only liable for criminal activity if we can prove that the state directed the criminal activity, or at least provided the money, provided the expertise, provided the resources. This is a very high bar to have to meet. And therefore, President Putin tends to sort of blame patriotic hackers and never the complicity of the Russian state. So the first thing is that we need a change in international law to what I call overall control, which is that it's enough to point out that the attack came from a certain territory or a jurisdiction to oblige the state then to take action to investigate, to arrest or to shut down these criminal networks. For example, when the United States invaded Afghanistan after 9/11 20 years ago, it didn't say that the Taliban had carried out the terrorist attacks against New York or Washington. That was Al-Qaeda. But it did say that the Taliban were harboring Al-Qaeda, knew what was going on and had not taken any action to shut them down and therefore had made themselves liable. This is the type of principle, overall control, that we now need for a new doctrine of cyber responsibility. Going beyond that, what we have to have is a new international convention on cybercrime, for example, based on the Council of Europe Budapest Convention that 50 mainly Western countries are using at the moment. We need to set up a UN body, rather like the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna or the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons in The Hague, which has the teeth to carry out investigations, which has specialized teams who have the technical and financial knowledge to know what is going on. These two UN agencies have been very effective in carrying out investigations, getting to the bottom of things, and naming and shaming the perpetrators. We need to build into international trade agreements under the World Trade Organization provisions about the prevention of cybercrime and the duty to cooperate as well. We need extradition agreements between states so that hackers cannot hide in certain jurisdictions. And rather like the red notices or the yellow notices of Interpol, international arrest warrants can be arrested as soon as they cross borders and face justice. We need something also like the Financial Action Task Force in Paris, which has been very successful in discovering terrorist terrorist sources of finance, this task force can go after the ill-gotten gains of the gangs. For example, when the Lazarus North Korean group broke into the Bank of Bangladesh a few years ago and stole $96 million, a lot of this money was never transferred to North Korea because the FBI and other police authorities tracked it to a series of casinos in the Philippines and blocked the transfers, just like the FBI successfully blocked the Bitcoin that the gang that hacked into Colonial Pipelines was hoping to gain. If the criminals can't get the money, they will be less willing to engage in this type of activity in the first place. We also need at home laws that make it illegal to pay ransoms, just like we have for kidnappings and hostage taking. Because, of course, if we hand over the money, the criminals will be incentivized and they will use the money not only to get rich, but to recruit more expertise, to go after new technologies, to be able to carry out even more sophisticated attacks in the future. And we need to make sure that companies which are the victim of ransom attacks don't just keep quiet about it to avoid embarrassment, but declare the breaches to the states, and that those states, as Biden has pledged to do in the case, for example, of the ransomware attacks, to use intelligence resources to see who is responsible. And if we can prove that there is a link to state activity, then have major sanctions against those states to hold them to account. So in a nutshell, is cybercrime a fatality that we are forced to endure? Absolutely not. There are means that we can use to turn this activity from what currently is a very profitable, very low risk form of crime into the opposite, less profitable and increasingly risky. And that is the course of action that we urgently now must pursue, unless Swedish shoppers are to find it even more difficult to get their weekend bread and milk from their co-op in the future. Thank you for watching and listening today. I look forward to engaging with you again, this time next week. Bye.